Topic 8.2, Part 2, Energy Flow Through Ecosystems. To help you study, I've put together a checklist that tells you exactly what you need to study in AP Bio Unit 8, and in fact, all of AP Biology. To download it, go to apbiosuccess.com/checklist. What is an ecosystem? It's a community, the living populations in an area, plus the abiotic, non-living parts of the environment. Those abiotic parts include the air, the soil, the water, and the energy that's flowing through that ecosystem. Two essential concepts related to ecosystems are food chains and food webs. A food chain is the passage of energy and matter from one organism to the next within an ecosystem. On the left, we see a terrestrial food chain where a plant is getting eaten by insects, which is getting eaten by other insects, which passes to a frog, etc. On the right side, we see something equivalent for an aquatic food chain. On the right side, we have a food web, and a food web shows all the interconnected food chains in an ecosystem, and the arrows flow from the organism that gets eaten to the organism that eats it. And if these arrows look like they're flowing in the wrong direction, they're not. The small birds eat the fish, and that passes energy and matter from the fish to the small birds. And the same thing happens with mollusks and small birds, and so on and so forth. What are trophic levels? Describe the trophic levels found in most ecosystems. A trophic level is an organism's position in a food chain or a food web. You've seen this word root troph before in terms like heterotroph and autotroph, which we worked with in Unit 3. Producers, autotrophs, create energetic compounds almost always through photosynthesis. The one notable exception are those ecosystems that are based on geothermal energy way under the sea near hydrothermal vents. Primary consumers or herbivores eat the producers. Secondary consumers or carnivores eat the primary consumers. Tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers, and the level goes up to fourth level and fifth level consumers. When organisms at any level die, their remains are broken down by decomposers, really important but not shown in this diagram of a food chain. Describe the pyramid of energy and explain the 10% rule. The pyramid of energy shows the amount of harvestable chemical energy at each trophic level. So this is saying that at the producers, you could harvest 10,000 kilocalories worth of chemical energy. At the primary consumer level, there's only 1,000 kilocalories, and that relationship stands true for the other trophic levels as well. Each trophic level has 10% of the chemical potential energy of the level beneath it. We'll see why in the next slide. What are the reasons for the 10% rule? The first reason has to do with physics. Energy is lost to heat during any energy transformation. That's the second law of thermodynamics. So when primary consumers are eating producers, that's an energy transformation. Some of that energy is simply lost as heat. The other reasons that we're going to discuss are more biological. So any organism is using the fuel that it takes in as part of its metabolism. That doesn't go to growth, and therefore it's not available for the next trophic level. There are limits to harvest efficiency. In other words, these caterpillars over here, they're not going to eat every single bit of the leaves that they're eating, and they're certainly not going to eat the stems or the roots, so they're not harvesting everything. And then, in terms of what they do harvest, they don't assimilate everything. A lot of the food that any organism eats goes through it and passes out as feces. Just note that the 10% rule is an average. It's a rule of thumb that explains how energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next within ecosystems. The pyramid of energy is only one way to represent what's happening in ecosystems. There are other ecological pyramids as well. One is the pyramid of biomass, and what that shows is how much living mass is passed from one trophic level to the next. And that's usually mass with water removed. It's the dry weight of all of the producers compared to the dry weight of all of the consumers. Some pyramids of biomass are indeed like pyramids, but there are others like this one that's been famously studied in the English Channel that are not. And if that seems counterintuitive, the basic idea is that the producers grow at an enormous rate, and they're consumed by the consumers. So if you measure at any one moment, the standing biomass of the producers can be less than that of the consumers. There's also a pyramid of numbers, and some of those are pyramidal, but if you think about a pyramid of numbers for a tree, you'll have one tree that's being the source of food for thousands or millions of herbivores that are in turn being consumed by carnivores. So the pyramid of numbers, not always pyramidal either. Your success in AP Biology starts here. Are you struggling with AP Bio? With Learn-Biology.com, students get the skills and confidence to be a top student and earn 4s and 5s on the AP Bio exam, guaranteed. Go to Learn-Biology.com to find out how you can master your biology course and crush the AP Bio exam. A biogeochemical cycle is yet another way to represent what's going on in an ecosystem. A biogeochemical cycle shows the movement of elements or compounds between the biotic, living, and the abiotic, non-living parts of an ecosystem. And the components include reservoirs, that's locations where elements or compounds accumulate, often in chemically different forms. So for example, one reservoir for the carbon cycle is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Another reservoir would be all of the carbon that's found in plants. Fluxes or flows are ways in which these compounds or elements move from one reservoir to another. So photosynthesis is a flux by which carbon dioxide in the atmosphere comes into plants. Consumption is a kind of flux by which the carbon that's trapped in plants moves to animals. If there's one biogeochemical cycle to be familiar with in your AP Bio class, that would be the carbon cycle. And here's how it works. The carbon cycle could start anywhere, but let's start with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That carbon dioxide gets pulled into plants through the process of photosynthesis, and think back to the Calvin cycle back in Unit 3. Those plants themselves respire, and that returns carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Plants can also be consumed by animals. Animals respire, and that returns carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. When plants die, when animals die, their carbon moves to decomposers. The decomposers do cellular respiration on those remains of plants and animals, and respiration returns carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Sometimes when plants die, and to a much smaller degree when animals die too, they become fossilized into fossil fuels, things like coal and oil. Those get extracted through oil drilling and coal mining, and then those power the machines of our civilization. And so that becomes another major flux called combustion. That, of course, is having impacts on our climate, but that's more of a topic for an environmental science class than it is for AP Biology. Here are your next moves for AP Bio success. Please subscribe to Learn-Biology.com and please watch this next video.